Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Elfrink, head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers. And today I am talking to Elliott Holland. Elliott runs a due diligence service, which we get into during this podcast. I actually heard about Elliott through another podcast, Acquiring Minds, where he moderated a panel. And I was really blown away by this guy's knowledge. He had a lot of really good stuff to say. And he has walked the walk, but he can also talk the talk in such a way where if you're brand new to buying a business, he breaks it down whether you're buying a $500,000 business or a $15 million business. Some of the things you need to think about. We trade some war stories throughout year. So there will be show note links to all of Elliott's stuff down below. If you want to check out his service even more and learn more about the war stories that he talks about at the end, he has a whole page dedicated to it. And this is by far, if you're looking to buy a business, probably one of, if not the most important skill for you to learn is knowing how to do due diligence, or at least knowing enough that you may not know enough and hiring someone who does know enough to help you with that. So with that said, let's get into it. Let's talk to Elliott and learn about due diligence. All right. I got Elliott Holland with me here. I'm pretty excited that you're on here. We were just talking a little bit offline how I found you on another podcast about acquisitions where you were moderating a panel. I already forgot the name. I believe it was Acquiring Minds. My memory is terrible. But I really enjoyed your panel all about due diligence and what you're doing. It was super entertaining. I was just like, man, I want to get this guy on here. So, Elliott, welcome to the show, my friend. Why don't
Good
you
to
tell
be
my audience
here.
a bit about yourself? Yes, thank you. Tell my audience a bit about yourself and where you're at.
Yeah, so I'm a reformed engineer and a fancy MBA dude. I hit the lottery and got a chance to go to Harvard for business school. But I fell in love with small deals 13 years ago. So I worked in private equity for a while. I was an independent sponsor, which is just a deal dude that raises money deal by deal. And then I was a self-funded searcher, which is just a poorer dude with less money who does the
Fancy
same
poor
thing.
guy.
Yeah, so I had a rich partner when I was an independent sponsor, and then when it was just my behind out there doing it myself, I think the term now is self-funded searcher. And what I found through about 8 years of being on the deal side was that the solutions for due diligence for small deals and for first-time buyers completely stunk, in my opinion, because they're made for huge private equity firms and they're made from a audit perspective, which on $100 million deals, there's a controller or CPA who can sort of manage audit-like questions. On a $500,000 online business, there's not. And so I created Guardian Due Diligence to be the sort of diligence solution that I needed and wanted, and realized that other people would need it too. And over the years, what we've sort of morphed into is not just kind of the traditional financial due diligence, which primarily for deals like this would be quality of earnings, but we also manage and help our clients through understanding and identifying red flags that can be slightly outside of the realm of like purely financial. And then also helping a lot of first time buyers with the process, which typically means sequencing and negotiations. Meaning, broker says crazy thing like this, seller says wild thing like this, taxes look completely fictitious. Is
You
that
gotta
a
watch
deal
out for those
breaker?
brokers, man. Those brokers
Is
are
that an
terrible people.
unsavory thing? Those brokers are crazy, man. Greg, I don't know if you know any of them, but they're wild. Wild.
For sure.
Disclaimer. So I'm one of the few diligence folks who will say this publicly. I think the uniquely valuable set of things that brokers do is underutilized and underappreciated in all deal making, because until you run a proprietary search and spend 6 months getting nothing, you don't realize how important brokers are. And until you have to go to explain to somebody who's old and has enough money to not have to do anything about all the painful steps in this process, then you don't know what people like Empire Flippers and other brokers do. Yeah.
Just a quick aside. I'm glad you said that. Appreciate it. But I had a friend, I get this every now and then where people are like, oh, brokers, they just send an email out to their list and that's how they sell. So every now and then, one of my friends in the digital like marketing community will start their own brokerage. I'm like, hey,
Right.
man, I wish you the best of success, abundance mindset, all that kind of stuff. But I want to wish this business model on anyone if you're just starting out. This is actually like really, really hard. And that guy, he started it, and like not even a week and a half later, he's like, "You're right, I give up. This is way too much." Like, man, wait till you get the deal that's successful, and that's where they're only kind of mad at you because, like, you're so much compromise between buyers and sellers, right? Managing
Oh yeah,
expectations.
and then managing a funnel because you guys have to have X amount of deals to have a likelihood of closing one, and so you do work on X, you get paid on one in a real way. There may be some
Right.
retainers and whatnot, and so what would be interesting is like I wish there was like a graveyard or like a tombstone set with all the people who started proprietary search, which is somewhat related to like brokerage, and then stopped and went back to doing broker deals because I think that would tell the value of brokers emphatically in a data driven way. But somebody else needs to go do that work.
I would love to see that. Before we get into some of your due diligence chops here, I'm pretty interested in your come up story. So you were, I believe you
Sure.
said, an independent sponsor. Talk to me a little bit about your journey through private equity, through independent sponsor, and your own search funded deal. Like, you don't have to go super detailed, but it'd be cool to get some of that background.
Yeah, man. What they say, the master has failed more times than the student has tried. So if I'm prefacing it with that, you probably know where I'm going. So I just failed at a bunch of stuff and kept trying. So well, first off, my father and mother did very similar work to what I did. So I sort of, they say I got it honestly. So like my dad's old business card holder for his SBA business
Oh,
is right
awesome.
here. And so after undergrad, I did strategy consulting, which was a really cool way to sort of punch above my weight class because you're advising like you're 22 and you're advising some 50-year-old COO. And although you don't know squat about like the whole world, you know these very specific things and you sort of build up this capacity to instruct. I then was fortunate. So I took my GMAT while I was still in undergrad. So I got a high score and I finagled that into Harvard Business School. So I went to get my MBA, but I was in school with all the folks, and some people that's listening to this won't even know this. There was a crash in the market in 2008 where Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, two institutions you probably don't even know anything about, crashed. So think about Silicon Valley Bank times 10. So I was in business school with all these like super finance bros, and I just outcalled everybody. So I called 250 people and got one job that I actually had to start. I had to convince a firm that instead of hiring a Harvard Business School alum for a full-time job that started February of my last semester, they should hire me for 30 hours a week until I graduated. So I was hustling, hustling.
Wow. They probably loved that. That's some sales chops. I have a friend, he works in banking in San Francisco, and the stories he tells me, like, he specifically did investment banking with Wells as like, I guess like that's a lower on the financial totem pole versus the
It is.
literal financial engineer position he did get because he's like, I don't want to work 120 hours a week.
Yeah, yeah. No, that was it, man. And then I got super fortunate in that, and I'm sharing this thinking about the buyer. So bear with me a second. These details I think will help. I worked for a family office that did private equity deals, which meant they were really an independent sponsor to an extent, which
Mhm.
meant all my friends at Harvard thought I was silly for going to some firm that hadn't raised a fund because you're not anything if you haven't raised a fund. But I saw the economics my boss was getting, his two private jets, the fact that everybody who worked for him were friends and his daughter worked for him, which would never be possible in true private equity. And I was like, he's got it right, they've got it wrong. And so that was my first kind of diversion from listening to even like the Harvard level intelligence. Like my private equity finance teacher called me stupid. I was like, wow. Well, I just know my boss just took home 60 million bucks and these folks walking around here didn't do that this week. So whatevs. I also quickly learned that the name of the game is owning equity. So I transitioned out of that firm to convince a mentor of mine to start working with me. He had been around the block, and so we did independent sponsor deals, which simple definition is just smart, rich Harvard dudes, and now even more regular, everyday dudes who go put deals under letter of intent and find the money while you're in due diligence. I mean, I could make it sound more fancy, but that's what we were doing. And he was incredibly brilliant and an MBA and a JD, so I kind of had to write a lot of my own legal docs, which helps me with negotiations now. But he effectively retired like 2 or 3 years in, but kind of in a weird way. It was just our strike zone kept getting so small that it was like dude, are we looking for like Beyonce, who married Michael Jordan and had like a basketball playing, super singing kid? Is that the only deal we're doing? Like, I'm too young and I'm poor. I need to do deals. I can't pontificate. So that's what made me spin out to do like a self-funded searcher, which is just a poorer dude, in my opinion, that endeavors to do the same things, but leverages the SBA 7A program oftentimes. And that's when I sort of took a run. So let me pause. We did a tow truck company, an automotive parts business, and a clinical trials business as an independent sponsor. And then I took a run at a deal, well, several, but one that went pretty far as an independent or self-funded searcher. And dude, I remember like owing my equity guys 10 grand, driving to Arkansas because I couldn't afford like a flight to Memphis to drive. So it was like some ungodly trip. And then one of my equity guys' mentors blew up the deal for some selfish reasons. And I was like broker than broke. So like I'm in Atlanta in a Land Rover driving for Lyft trying to pay rent. Cause like you can't get a job in like November, you know what I mean? So like I was struggling and I took a break year, 2017. And I was like, I have all these amazing skills, but I've sort of, the financing market for small deals, Greg, wasn't as I'm advanced then. So a lot of people know like Live Oak Bank that does a lot,
Mhm.
or you may even know like e-commerce lending. There was no e-commerce lending. Live Oak Bank only lent to physician-led companies, so that would probably knock out everything on Empire Flippers. And so,
I mean, even e-commerce lending didn't come around to like maybe 2020. I've been with you since 2016, and if someone said like, "How do you finance these deals?" Like, well, you must not be a buyer because there is no way to finance them. It was just like
man,
impossible back then.
2016, it was very hard. And a lot of the banks that like openly do SBA deals to fund acquisitions, so we take it as second nature, weren't doing them. So maybe they do an SBA deal for like me in my business to give me 100 grand to go do something, but like Greg buying my business, no freaking way.
Right,
So
right.
that was a lot of details to get to this. I sort of had to realize what I was good at and then put together something that enabled me to make some money, but also help folks. And so Guardian was sort of like, how can I leverage these deal skills to help people? And as more and more first time buyers really came into the market, it was like, they're getting had. Like I'll give the example of like my core customer, right? So it's like somebody who's like probably 25 to 32 years old. They have worked long enough to know that they want to do something else. They want to buy a business. And here's what they're up against. So a 30-year-old, let's say, a 60-year-old seller sometimes, maybe not Empire Flippers, but somewhere else, and maybe some 55 or 60-year-old broker. Then some CPA who's probably 50 and some change. And then you have to tell all of them no and you're wrong sometimes to get to a closed deal. And so part of what we do is like the specific quality of earning stuff and diligence. Part of it is being sort of that old school voice to tell my client that no, that what he just said is bullshit.
I love that. I mean, even on EF, as a buyer, you're still competing against sellers with sometimes, overblown valuations. We do our best when we bring a seller into the marketplace to have a more realistic expectation. But, a lot of these entrepreneurs, I would say even brick and mortar, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they just want an outsized valuation, like give me a 9X for, for this business that clearly does not deserve a 9X, right?
Right.
They're always thinking Silicon Valley tech kind of valuations. But let's get into your due diligence stuff because I'm quite intrigued on your knowledge here. You seem quite educated in the space. So, first of all, for a lot of my audience, you mentioned this a couple times on the call, quality of earnings. What
Sure.
does that refer to? Just explain that in layman's term for our audience.
Yeah. So I'll explain it in the way that first time buyer you should care. So if I'm selling a business on Empire Flippers, I know I'm getting 2 to 6 times EBITDA, which means as a reasonable human, I probably have the highest incentive to lie that I'll ever have as a seller, right? Outside of like your spouse asking you, did you cheat? I don't know any of them that's probably as pressure, sensitive as this. So then, hey, first time buyer, do you know what cash flow or EBITDA is? And can you point to it in QuickBooks or taxes or financials? Probably not. So the umbrella term is due diligence, which is just checking the stuff that people said to you is true. So that's the broad umbrella. In small deal, which I say is anything under 20 million bucks, which is not really small. Quality of earnings is probably the number one tool used for financial due diligence, and financial due diligence is probably 80% of the game for these businesses, right? Because if you're buying something for $1 million, it's probably doing $300,000 or so of sales discretionary earnings. But like sales discretionary earnings is not on taxes, it's not in QuickBooks. Somebody had to calculate it. You need to check it. So the quality of earnings generally is just a sort of systematic quantitative way to check that number. Well, Elliot, they gave it to me in the Empire Flippers website. Why don't I just trust that, man? Like, come on. And if that's who you are, just stop the podcast, go do some deals, man. You don't need this.
Buy
If
a
you're
lot of businesses from EF right now.
email Greg right now. Do not stop. Do not let it go. Do not collect 200.
We got a few
Buy
7-figure
everything.
deals ready for you right now. I'm
Start
glad you
at the
said that.
biggest deal
Yeah,
and then
work
start
your way
going
down from
down.
there. We'll get the credit cards in here. It's going to be great for at
Yeah,
least the
Amex,
seller and
man.
us.
Just swipe that. Swipe it.
I'm glad you said that because one of my second questions I wanted to ask you actually was about vetting and due diligence and your perspective on this. So obviously I'm biased towards brokers. It sounds like you have a lot of respect for brokers. But with that said, like I think it's important for a first time buyer to know the difference between like what you're doing and what a broker does, right? Like we
Sure.
always say what we do is vetting, and we do
Yeah.
reject like 96% of businesses that come to us,
Yeah.
but our vetting is just cursory, right? To make sure it's as
Sure.
legitimate as possible versus what you're doing as due diligence. It's like super deep dives, like the guy you just mentioned, trusting blindly what EF says. Like,
Yeah.
thank you, but bad move.
Sure.
You shouldn't
Bad
do
move.
that as a buyer.
So I'm going to use an analogy that I hope people can understand or something similar. So you go to a used car lot, right? And that's just, I'm not going to equate anything to anything. You go to a used car lot. They vetted all those cars, right? Why? Because if they don't run or if there's something terrible, that used car lot has a reputation. Repeat customers is how they work. And so they're not just going to take some clunker that's going to like fall out the engine before you get off the lot kind of thing. So they've vetted the cars, which to me means generally they're trying to do good business, which I think is kind of a corollary to how I would consider a brokerage firm vetting deals. They want to do good business with good people. Repeat business is how you get
Yep.
really rich. However, if you've ever bought a used car, the thing that most smart people do is take it to their mechanic, not the mechanic on the used car lot, not the mechanic that doesn't understand the Ford or the Chrysler or the Tesla, but somebody who specializes in this kind of vehicle, because you can't take a used car back. You can't take a business back. So what
Yep.
I do is kind of like that mechanic spends a day with the thing. I'm smelling the transmission fluid. I'm looking at the engine. I'm looking at all the belts. I'm looking at the axles. I'm looking at the Carfax to see if it's been an accident. I'm checking the panels. I'm doing everything that I can so that, used car lot said never in an accident, never seen, snow or salt, perfect, repair history. This thing will be good for 500,000 miles. And then you bring it to your mechanic, the Guardians, the quality of earnings folks, and they're like, 2 accidents, just got repainted a week ago. Axle's about to fall apart in a terrible situation. But let's say a more reasonable situation, right? Because most oftentimes it's like 20 or 30% if it's something significant. So it's like, hey, yeah, no, the car's been in 2 accidents. It was in Michigan for a year. So there definitely is some salt damage under the hood. But by and large, it's a good deal, but you might not want to pay the full price that was offered. Based on these new facts, you may want to adjust the price a bit. And so that's kind of the vetting is at the used car lot. Like they're not going to bring just crap to market. But the diligence is because you can't take it back, you have to do all the work that you would do to prevent buying a lemon beforehand. And that's what we do with the quality rate.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are used car lots who do have clunkers. My dad who works in real estate, he had a client when I was like, I think it was 19. The client tried to sell me my first car, and he's like, "This Buick is great, Greg. It was driven by a nun just to the grocery store and the church. It's in perfect condition. Nothing's ever bad happened." Like, I take it to mechanic. It's been wrecked like twice. Like it's barely
Yes.
working. Like, yeah, man, this
Yes.
nun was a speed demon. What's going on?
Exactly. Exactly. And then,
So
let me give a caveat too. there's like malicious misstatements. So there's some bad actors, I'll say. I'll keep it PG
Sure.
13 in every industry, right? So there's a used car lot in your city that will sell a clunker and be like, gotcha. However, a better question in deals, in my opinion, is could this person know given what they've checked? So I'm checking 100 things sometimes less, 50. As a person vetting a deal on the broker side, I'm taking financials from the seller. I'm taking taxes from the seller. I'm believing what the seller says because why would I not? I'm qualifying things that I know are likely untrue and not putting those in my memorandum. But I didn't spend the used car lot equivalent of a day looking at the engine, transmission, axle, tires, right? And so you shouldn't expect a broker to know as much as somebody who spent the time to do due diligence. So like sometimes people get frustrated at the brokerage community. I'm like, guys, that's not their job. Their job is to go find a seller, put together a memo, clean the information and get it to a point where you can assess it. It's your job as a buyer to do due diligence because
Yeah.
there's no return.
I mean, we do try to help people. I would say we're probably one of the more buyer-friendly brokers because of that, which sellers sometimes don't actually like, because that sometimes
And
means
that's
a worse
fair.
deal for the seller. So we try to be fair to both sides. But yeah, like some brokers just do not do any of that. Like the information is completely wrong. So it's worthwhile to be careful. Let's circle back to your service here. So when a buyer is looking at a deal, they're walking into the car lot, they find a car that they want, they bring it to the mechanic, like when is that point? Like do you recommend like you have your first set of kind of your buy box of criteria, get that all checked off, then go to someone like you? Like where in the deal making process do they bring you in?
Sure. So I would say within a couple of days of signing a letter of intent is when people bring me in. And here's why. You typically have, 30 to 90 days to close a deal. Our process takes 30 days. And so if you don't start right after you get a letter of intent, you risk sort of your process of due diligence not being done by the time you need it to be done to go finalize financing, purchase agreement, and all the rest. So
Yep.
if you're a smart buyer, you should definitely kick the tires, using the same analogy as best as you can. But if you're not like a financial accountant, CPA person, most of the stuff that would get past an Empire Flippers, because you guys are going to check a lot of stuff, is going to be too detailed for like the average novice, even in 2 weeks to really do anything of value. You need to go get some help.
Yeah, that makes sense. And 30 days is usually the typical time we see exclusive like DD on our marketplace. So that makes total sense to me. In terms of the actual areas of what you're doing, you mentioned 80% of it is financial, but maybe you can break the areas that you're doing due diligence on into a few buckets and explore it a
Sure.
little bit deeper with me.
Yeah. Um, so in online businesses, I would say there's four buckets of diligence. So in all businesses, there's sort of financial, are the numbers solid? Operational, sort of are the bones inside of the business, the employees, the systems, the processes, are they sort of repeatable and knowable? Commercial is sort of how does the internal sales engine of the business interact with the external market that the business is in, the industry that it's in? Fancy words, but does this thing sell stuff and will it continue to sell stuff reliably? Right. And then in online businesses, there's all the online metrics that you can track that have known meanings, right? So is your return on ad spend going up or down? How many times have you had to deal with marketplace disruptions and how well have you dealt with that over long periods of time? So sort of four buckets, right? And so I would say on an online business, 70 to 80% of our work is in financial. But here's the thing, when you're earlier in your deal life, you think of financial as like this like desert barren land that just bank stuff happens in. Like, just let me run my business. I don't want to deal with that SHIT, right? As you get older and more mature into your deal life, you realize that the only way financials are created is through operations of a business. And so all you're reading is the story of operations of a business in this financial lens. So I can't tell you about EBITDA being down without telling you that, well, hey, revenue took a dip in June. They lost an employee. They brought the employee back 2 months later. So, things went down and then came back up. So the way that I explain financials is through operations, meaning that they're all sort of morphed together, but you look at them when you're analyzing them in different buckets.
Yeah. Funny enough, I always call the P&L the story of the business. So like you see revenue dip, like, okay, oh, that's when they got hit by that Google penalty and their SEO's traffic suffered. This is all lining up, right? So
That's right.
that's the way I look at it as well. Like the operations and you said commercial, I usually call that the marketing side. A lot of our businesses don't have a sales team necessarily, but
Sure.
yeah, I agree with that. Real quick on the financial side, and I think this is a probably an important lesson for people doing due diligence. I'm assuming when you're looking at a P&L statement, you're not just relying purely on like the QuickBooks or the Zero. Like you're using that as a guiding point, but are you looking at other stuff too? Like, all right, they have a Stripe
Sure.
payment processor. Let's dig into that, or look at actual bank wires, or in the case of maybe like a massive media site with affiliates, like let's look at the actual checks coming in from those affiliate networks. Is that something you're trying to do with your due diligence?
Sure. So we don't believe squat until we see it coming from a primary source that won't lie for anyone. Which means like I manipulated QuickBooks for clients when I was, a interim CFO. Not maliciously, just they had like 20-year-old businesses with like bogus balance sheet stuff from 20 years ago. You can't get along with that crap, so you have to sort of adjust
Yeah.
things, right? But there are people who will maliciously adjust that, and then so financials are the main data source, but questionable reliability. Then taxes. Well, nobody tells the full story to the IRS.
You're either trying to save as much as you can or spend as much as you can because you're looking to do an exit, right? It's
That's
like
it. That's
they're
it. And
never
either
accurate.
way,
Yeah, they're never right.
and then
The
even the
SBA
people who
letter's always
understand,
frustrated.
oh my gosh. And then, even if you understand the P&L, then you got to go understand the tax statement. And those are very different. And you'll want them to like add up dollar for dollar and they won't. And that will frustrate people. But Elliot, answer Greg's question. So what do you actually believe? Well, you can't walk into Chase Bank with $100 and say, well, hey, tell Greg it's 1,000. You actually can't walk into Chase Bank on January 1 of a year and say, hey, man, no, man. This is supposed to be in last year's accounts, man. Can you just like do that thing and put it?
A quick solid.
No. Chase, don't lie for nobody. So we take the bank statements, the Stripe payments, the affiliate systems, something where there's a brand name like Stripe that's like, yeah, we'll back it out and show it through the transaction list, but we're not gonna, backdate something. And so then we start from the primary document, the bank statement, the Stripe, the whatever, and now I would say, okay, so now we're in the ballpark, and I believe like the whole story. So now I can go more into the financials and the taxes to refine it. But until I check the primary data source that's beyond lying, I don't believe much of anything, which is why oftentimes when I see other diligent solutions that don't do what's called a proof of cash, which is recreating the P&L from the
Mhm.
bank statements or Stripe statements or whatever, I call bullswing because I don't even know what they did. I see so many reports and they're cheap, so I get it. But it's like they just restated QuickBooks and put three
Yeah,
three
well,
pages.
like put their logo on it. Come on, Elliot. They did
Oh, and got
something.
their check.
Like
Yeah,
Canva
yeah, yeah.
logo, boom.
Also, there are 3 pages of disclaimers that we didn't look at everything. If we're wrong, you can't sue us. We didn't look at it all. You can't hold us accountable. We
We do
didn't
not
know.
guarantee
This is
these
not an
results.
audit. Don't take me to court. I got a big bad
Right.
lawyer. And
Yeah.
so make sure whatever diligence you're doing that you understand the scope. And these are like fancy words, but it's just like, okay, you wouldn't take your Tesla to an old Ford mechanic, right?
Yeah.
And if it's an
100%.
electronic car, you wouldn't trust a dude that didn't know electronic systems all that well, right? So just make sure that like, because the worst thing is to pay for some diligence that didn't do anything. Think about this. Think about hiring like a first-time security guard to go into war and protect you in like a war zone. Like you actually
Yeah,
paid
it's
and
kind of
still got
civilian
shot,
soldier.
right? It's like, no, if
Uh,
you're gonna actually pay for some protection, pay for some protection.
yeah. It's funny, man. It happened. So we came up in the industry as kind of like a pretty weird company because our background was not doing this. So we kind of fell into it from an outsourcing company.
Really?
We used to, yeah, yeah. So we used to be a outsourcing company in the Philippines. Like this is before even my time, but we
Wow.
lost like one of our biggest clients, and so we had our Filipino staff like just make a bunch of affiliate websites. It's like, well, we need them to do something. Like, why not do this? And they
Sure.
started making money, and so we started selling it and blogging it about it as a side hustle, which eventually grew into our marketplace where our audience who were much better at building sites than we were like, hey, could we sell with you guys? Like,
That's brilliant.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, we
So
do
we
that.
like, We do it now. So that's literally how we started. So a lot of like stuff that's like old hat in the M&A world is like, what? You do it that way? Like if you look at our marketplace, you'll see
Yeah,
like things valued at 30, 40x, and you're like, what the hell is this? Because like back then we were selling sites that were only like 3 months old. So we put everything on a
right.
monthly multiple. And it just kind of
That's right.
stayed that way
Oh, I
forever.
do remember looking at your stuff and seeing that.
So
Yeah,
yeah, so like I know if someone is like an EF bro or a normal M&A person based on which way they say the multiple. Like, oh yeah, that's
got it.
3x. Like, okay, normal guy. No, that's a like a 36x. Like, he's one of my guys
I
because
see.
we're the only
EF
ones who
guy.
does this.
Yeah. Did you
But
guys come out of like tropical MBA?
yeah, yeah. So we got
Okay, so
started
I've
with
been tracking
that.
that whole thing for a decade. So
Yeah.
yeah, I know about that ecosystem. I didn't know Empire Flippers came. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're one of their main sponsors. In fact, Dan that owns DC, which is part of the whole Tropical MBA,
Yeah,
I don't know if it was because of us or maybe we influenced it, but the first mastermind in the Dynamite Circle was when Dan was with Justin, one of the co-founders of EF in the Philippines, and Justin was like, "This is a cool idea, man. You should totally do this." So yeah, we've always been a bit of the cowboys of the M&A world for this reasoning, right? But
that's
what I was
awesome.
going to say, like years ago, like we started discovering e-commerce entrepreneurs are so bad with their own numbers. Like they weren't trying to
Yes,
be nefarious. They were just literally not good with bookkeeping, which,
that's right.
entrepreneurs creative. I get it. I'm a marketer. So basically just useless with math, right? Unless I've
Yeah,
like some real big help. But yeah, so we started like doing kind of what you're doing. I don't think we probably don't go nearly as in detail as you, but we
sure.
basically would, they give us the P&L like, great, now we need to go make it. But like, oh, well, we just gave it to you. Like, yes, but we don't trust you. Like, we love you, but
Exactly.
there's
We
probably
love you.
mistakes in this. So let us handle that part for you. So we'll go to all the primary sources, right, to rebuild
Okay.
it. But you're totally right in doing that. I want to move in from the finance stuff to also the operational side. I'm really curious on this. I don't hear a lot of due diligence people talk about this side. So when you're
Sure.
looking at the operations of a company, like what are you looking for? Like you got the story from the P&L, now you're looking at the
Yeah.
operations. What does that look like?
So give me 90 seconds. I'm going to nerd out and then I'm going to zoom out. So let's think about a business that does e-commerce, some on Amazon, some not, right? And let's think about a business where there's a couple of channels. So let's talk about there's a Facebook ad channel, there's a website, email list, newsletter channel, there's the Amazon channel, and then there's like referral business, right? And so you're buying an e-commerce stuff, they sell widgets and they have all those channels. Okay. So I think about operations as what are the jobs that the business has to do. So if I'm selling widgets, I gotta either make them or have a vendor that makes widgets. Okay. I gotta go sell those widgets. Okay, well, who knows they need? I have to market those widgets. I have to do it sustainably, and I have to do it on the platforms that are available to me. And then I have to have staff that manages either inventory or like paperwork. And then I have to have some sort of dashboard that lets me see what the F is going on, right? So you get this P&L, million in revenue, $200,000 in SDE, but you got to think about like who's managing the relationship with the vendor. And is that person sticking around? Is it just clockwork? Who's actually doing the ads on Facebook and Google? Do they have some proprietary thing that they know? Are you a good enough Google and Facebook ad person to recreate it or to understand it? Or are you some novice that like is cutting grass today and you think you're going to do the same return on ad spend as that dude that's been doing it for 10 years and was hanging out with the DC dudes in the Philippines for a decade before he got good enough to come back stateside? So it's these operational things that like, do you know how to do it well enough that you don't need help? Is it something knowable quick enough where in the 30 to 90 days during due diligence, can you pick it up? Do you have enough cash to like fail at it for a little bit while you figure it out? And are there any known hiccups that could cause issues? So one of the challenges with online businesses is what you talked about, like you either get dinged by Google algorithm or Amazon algorithm, or they switch from time to time. And nobody says, hey, next week, we're going to switch up Amazon's algorithm, buddy. So get ready. And here's how we're going to do it. Here's a whole FAQ. It just boom. And so operational to me is thinking through. So let me go zoom out. So hopefully you just put it on 90-second pause and now you come back and you're like, all right, tell me quickly, Elliott. That revenue line's got to stay consistent, or you're not going to have a good investment. That profit line's got to stay consistent, or you're not going to have a good investment. All those things that make those things happen, or all these jobs the business has to do, can you do them day one? Because here's what's going to happen: the seller always says they're going to stick around and help you transition, which is usually true, right? But I'm going to tell you what: if a Google algorithm change hits or an Amazon one hits, and that's 80% of your business, that seller's not digging you out of that hole for the $10, $20 an hour you're paying them after they take home a big check. So hopefully that made sense. Greg, was that too nerdy? I hope I answered the question.
No, that's perfect. In fact, I think that is the kind of wake up call a lot of newbie buyers should listen to. I mean, there's a lot of veterans on listening to this too, but some people they'll see like a no money down guru, which I'm a fan of no money down deals. I think they're very advanced. Like, but they'll like a newbie will try to use that strategy. It's like, man, they're like, there's a lot more going on here than you think. Like, yes, the
Yes,
sellers say like I'm only working 8 hours a week on this business, but you as the buyer are not going to be working 8 hours a week. That's
that's
someone
right.
who like started this business, like put in the blood and sweat and tears, knows it inside and out, and probably put in a lot of 100 hours a week when they were first starting it, which is more
That's right.
likely what you're going to be doing when you buy
That's
this.
right.
So I like that a lot. Like I think buyers, especially newbie buyers, they look at SDE like easy $200,000 SDE, perfect. I'll be making 200 grand. Like no, you're not. That's 200 grand. Like yeah, someone that's going to go to you, but that is also has to cover your growth and also
That's
what I
right.
always call the oh shit day. Like there's always the oh shit day,
Yes,
which is when Google or
always.
Amazon changes their algorithm. And if you did this
Yeah,
no money down deal, guess what? You don't have an oh shit fund because you owe so many creditors, right? So I'm glad you said
bankrupt.
that.
You on
Yeah,
the other
exactly.
beach, not the
No
one
money
with the with
down
the with the
and broke.
with the cups and the umbrellas. That's not the beach you on. You on the beach where you got to build something from sand to go live in because you're
Oh
broke.
no, you might still be able to get the cup with the umbrella. You just have to dig into the trash can, and then you're kicked off from the beach.
Forgot.
Right?
Yes,
It's all about
recycling, organic.
creative deal making, Elliot. Creative deal
Right.
making.
That's such a great analogy. So let me give a for instance, and this is public. That same Acquiring Minds podcast you heard me on, not as good as yours, Greg, but a solid
Thank you.
one,
Appreciate it.
And if you go, there's a story that Will interviewed a dude about, and it was a private equity bro. So a really experienced buyer bought a ice delivery business. Think like industrial ice,
Mhm.
but because the business is in Florida, there's even like ice stands in parts of Florida. You might not think that's happening, but it is. And so this guy, look, $400,000, $500,000 STE. He goes through all the financial diligence, right? He uses all his like finance bros to check all this stuff and ratios. He's got a spreadsheet and everything. And then he admits it. He's like, man, I buy the business, close. I didn't realize that the owner was driving around delivering ice all day. He said he was only working 8 hours in the business a month. No, this dude lives in his truck and delivers ice. That's why the margins are there. So what does that mean as a new buyer with an SBA loan? Yo ass is driving around the ice truck, buddy. So you went from the 42nd floor and the Brooks Brothers and the wingtip shoes to now you got the steel toes, you got the one piece, jumpsuit like the prison guy, and you're saying, hey, Greg, where would you like your ice? Which isn't terrible, right? Because the dude probably made a lot of money doing it, but it's that how do you check that he's working 8 hours in the business? Because in
Right.
my premium service, we do what's called a key man risk assessment. So everybody's working 8 hours in the business. Everybody's passive. Everybody's remote. How do you check that? How do you know?
I love that you check that. I have a very good friend. He just did an SBA loan. I think it was probably over 4 million in the loan. I think I don't know the
Yeah,
exact details, but I think it was around there. And it was extreme key man risk. I actually interviewed him for my podcast. I won't say who it is because I think he was a bit
sure.
embarrassed by this. But I asked him like, "Weren't you afraid of the key man risk?" Because basically, it was this business that had two people in it. One guy was doing the vast majority of the work, and like it was a lot
Right.
of work. And he bought
Yeah.
the business, and those two guys went away. And my buddy
Yeah.
didn't know how to do the job. Like he
Oh,
thought it
wow.
was like this well-oiled machine like his
Right.
businesses that he had built because he's pretty good at
Yeah.
delegation. But this business had none of that, no teams. It's just the two owners basically. And he's like, "Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, I learned a lot about key man risk with this deal." So yeah, it could bite even experienced people, man. I've seen it on both sides. The
I'll tell you
financial,
what.
yeah, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Are you familiar with the FBA aggregators, that whole fiasco over the last few
Yeah,
years? I kind of joke that we created them because we always predicted that it would happen, and we were the first people to ever sell Amazon FBA businesses as far as brokers go. Like to the point
sure.
where we had to tell Amazon that they were actually allowed to sell FBA businesses, and Amazon was like, "Really? Like, yes, like legally they are allowed to." Like because it was against
Wow.
Amazon's policy for a long time,
Ah, I
and
got it.
yeah, so we educated Amazon on their own platform, which I thought was quite funny. But these aggregators rose up, right? And like just like your
Yeah,
friend with the ice business, amazing financial wizards, really good at M&A, really bad at running e-commerce businesses. Like
that's
they
right.
just like did
That's
not
right.
know what to do.
And I thought it was crazy because I had friends from like Harvard Business School. I did a deal with some guys in Germany that were buying up Amazon FBA aggregators. Three of them had Harvard MBAs and they worked on Wall Street doing private equity, doing like $100 million, $1 billion deals. And they're like, hey, can you check on this like $500,000 SDE business for us? And I'm like, you guys don't know how to run a business. You guys are spreadsheet gangsters. What do you
Spreadsheet
what do you
junkies,
do?
yeah.
Man, this is the swamp, man. You got boots? what, hold on, man.
I saw these
There's alligators in
aggregators.
these waters, man.
I saw these aggregators during the height of it. They're like, "Hey, did this aggregator make an offer on it?" And we would have like competitive bids, right? So they would
Sure.
know who's bidding on what. Like, "Oh, this one guy bid on it, so it's good enough for us." Like, what do you mean? You haven't even done due diligence on this? Like, yeah, but they did, and we trust them. Like, what? It's just like
It was so
this is not
crazy
going
because
to
it's
end
like the
well.
classic mistake. So, man, I'm going to say something emphatically, man. Not everything that scales makes any gosh darn sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, think
For sure.
about, because I think about your first deal as like your wife. You know what I'm saying? And like the engagement is like the LOI. So you trying to scale and quickly move through the process of evaluating women to be your wives or men to be your husbands? Or are you trying to do the right job the first time, almost at all costs, because too much is on the line? And depending on how much you're betting on this, some of this stuff don't really scale. Now, I'll tell another. I have a friend who bought a business that does diligence, and he said it publicly, so I won't. He had more automated businesses previously, and he didn't do his diligence on the diligence company he bought. And I know that caused some pain. And so, what I would say to that is just there's a lot of different levels of specificity and knowledge, but anybody can get had if this isn't their specialty. So, what I'll tell you is like 25% of my book of business have very similar backgrounds to me. They're private equity, investment banking, finance, Bain, BCG, just fancy dudes that do a lot of financial stuff. But I'll tell you what, in 60 days or 90 days to close like $1 million business, you've got too many other jobs that you got to do well for you to also be doing due diligence. And I would commit to your bias. If you like the deal enough to put a letter of intent on it, and this is your first deal, so like you're very prone to falling in love, you need somebody objective to say, no, that sucks. Or not even that sucks. I think that's off by 20%. You should maybe adjust your structure on the deal. And so, whether you use me, somebody else, hire a friend, look on Upwork, just make sure that you're doing the work. Because once again, like, there's no takebacks here. You can't like, hey, Empire Flippers, or even, the legal docs are great, but like try taking a dude to court and he's in the Philippines now after he sold you a business in Texas and he's got all his money. And so now, even if you win in a court case, I promise you that dude's going to spend every single dollar he got before he gives you anything. So just be smart.
Yeah, and to be clear, like most sellers aren't trying to be nefarious, right? But
Oh,
there's
no.
it's just easy to miss to stuff, even if it is your background. And like you said, there's no takebacks. We had one situation where a seller did it was a very small business. It was like 100 grand business, and the Google algorithm destroyed it. And he actually
Yeah.
rebuilt the buyer a whole brand new site and got it back up and running. Like because he felt
Wow.
really bad. But like that is not a
Yeah.
situation that's going to happen for most buyers, right? The seller won't
Yeah.
care like at a certain point. Let's move into some of the specific tactical questions you're asking. So like when a
Sure.
buyer is looking at buying a business, what kind of questions would you recommend that buyer go to the seller with?
All right, so there's a couple of things that I advocate for, and you have to keep in mind this is my deal dude hat now advising deal professionals. So this is like the get it done stuff. You're not going to see this on the Harvard Business School website. They're too fancy. Put that gosh darn clipboard down, bro. Like, don't walk in like a call with the seller, like, hey man, I've got my 17 questions. Okay, let me start with number 1. How do you execute Google Ads? All right. How do you fulfill on the widgets? No. You need to start with what are the deal breakers, right? So let's just use the widget example. Widget business, $1 million in revenue, $200,000 to SDE. What would kill the deal? Well, if revenue drops 200K, then that $200,000 of profit goes to zero. So $200,000 of revenue drop. If I think that's likely, that's a deal breaker. So I need to figure out when's the last time that happened, how likely this will happen in the future. If you have only one supplier, so there's a really famous, actually Stanford business case of a guy who bought a business that only had one supplier, and that supplier had ultimate leverage over him. So you need to go check, like, is there enough places I can source this widget that I don't get extorted day one because maybe, Johnny, who owns the company, has a special relationship with that vendor. And then how diversified and how stable has their marketing and sales engine been, which is largely going to be ad driven more than likely over the past couple of years where there's been some algorithm shifts. So, all right, so now I have, instead of like 20 questions, I've got 3. I need to check how consistent the revenue has been. I need to like really keen in on how good is the relationship with their vendor or vendors, and then how consistent have they been through several cycles of ad and platform changes. I use the widget example because every business is like that. It may be an affiliate business. So now you got to figure out, well, what's the churn in those affiliate relationships? What are the biggest ones? Are there any contractual stuff in place? All these kind of things, because that's your revenue. And so that's how I would go about it. Now, that might sound complicated to a first-time buyer, but really, the other question to ask is like, what do you need to believe for you to want to put the investment dollars you're about to invest into the business? And then I'd really spend 80% of your time on those finite things. And once you get to a list of like 20, bro, you're bull junking. You're not going to be able to get through that many questions. Like, you need to have about 5 solid, high-level questions. And yeah, they're going to have sub questions, but like focus on the 80. This is 80-20 like everything else.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that as well. I always recommend buyers to have kind of several different lists of questions in terms of like, but most of those questions you don't ask the seller. Like these are questions you're asking like your
Yes.
first glance of the P&L, and then like, all right, we signed the OI, give me some more intimate details. And then after all of that, that's when you have an actual call with the seller. Like, hey, there's some stuff I couldn't figure out based on the information you gave me, right? Like now we're
Sure.
having a conversation.
That's right.
And I think some buyers approach it like a showdown from a cowboy movie. Like, let's go! Like what? No, this is like your temporary business partner. Stop.
Yeah.
I'm in
Well,
agreement.
and hopefully you guys can link to this. I queried, so I do about 40 deals a year. And so I went back 3 years and looked at about 100 deals and said, like, what behaviors are indicative of closed deals and what behaviors are indicative of broken deals, blown up deals, right? And I have like a 10 best practice document, and I'll send it to you and share it with you.
Oh
But one of the
yeah, yeah.
things that
If
I
you have a
talk
link, we'll
about
put
in
it in the
there,
show notes.
yeah, one of the things I talk about in there is that, like, as a buyer, you're auditioning for the job. So the number one relationship in this whole transaction is you with the seller. And let me prove it to you. So Greg's selling a business, 200K SDE, and it's a competitive process because he's got it on Empire Flippers. And it's a clean deal because he's got it on Empire Flippers, right? And let's just say I'm Greg's best friend, right, from high school. And we've known each other for 20 years and we play ball together. And he knows I just got divorced. I need some money. I don't have much, but I'm the perfect buyer for this thing. Greg can say, man, I could probably get 600K from somebody, but Elliott, you're going to give me a seller. I'll give you a seller note for 600K if you close the thing in 30 days. So, meaning in an extreme case, the relationship will get you the best deal terms, which means if you start, let's go the alternative. So let's say I just met Greg yesterday. He's selling a business, and I do the showdown thing. I'm like, hey, man, why didn't you do this? Why don't you have an affiliate business? Why didn't you fire that gal that can't really do accounting? And he's like, this Elliott guy is a pain in the butt. So I got to go through a purchase agreement negotiation with him. I got to train this joker. I gotta hope he's actually gonna bring me the money. And the more he acts like a jerk, I don't think the banks are gonna like him either. So now it's like, yeah, it was 600K for a normal dude. You got to pay 1.2 million because you're a pain in the butt. So like, don't forget that the main relationship is with the seller. And so Greg made an excellent point. You may have 20 questions you want to know. You should figure out all the other ways you can get answers before you start berating the seller.
Yeah. Every question you ask the seller is another question where, like, one, the seller starts doubting themselves, like, wow, am I really bad at business? Like, it doesn't feel good. Like, I've been in some of
No,
those
no.
rooms with family office and private equity, and they were like really nice guys. They weren't like even grilling the seller, but like I could tell, like, the seller was so uncomfortable and they like
Yeah,
had to like practice in the mirror at the hotel for probably like a solid 10 hours on the weekend because they were so nervous before going to meet these guys who were really nice guys. They weren't trying to
yeah,
like break anyone's balls or anything like that. They were like cool
yeah,
dudes, but the
yeah.
seller was just like sweating.
Right.
Like, calm
So let me
down.
give you
Like,
one.
we're not to the hard questions yet.
I'll give you another for instance. So let's say Greg is one of those buyers that asks too many gosh darn questions, and I'm competing with him on a deal, right? And I know, man, most of these dudes ask too many questions and take too long. So I'm going to go into a seller meeting after he's done those 10 hours of practicing and after he's gotten ready for family office and private equity dudes. I'm going to talk about his life, his vacations, what he wants to do after I give him this big check. How did he create this amazing business? Like, what's the
Yep.
thing that he would do that he doesn't want to put his money on the line for, but I should probably put mine on the line for? My call's done in 10 minutes. I send a letter of intent. I promise you I'm sweeping the floor in most processes because I didn't make the seller feel uncomfortable. I came with confidence. I talked to the person as a human. I focused on the relationship. And so I'm just saying, most of my first time buyers, I know you're not going to be able to be that comfortable. But Elliot, I need to know. But Elliot, I know you need to know. But bro, you're not going to get any of those data facts in a way where you can believe them until after the letter of intent. So don't over optimize on these like pre LOI calls because really it should really be a get to know you thing.
Yeah.
It's almost like that introductory screen before like a real interview on a job. Like it should be more like, do we like each other? Because you're gonna have this 30 to 90-day process that's gonna be painful a little bit on both sides. So like, do I want to take this trust walk with this person?
Yeah, I agree. If for new buyers out there, if you don't have the same skills as Elliot, like with what you're talking about, and you do need to ask a seller more questions, I always recommend saying something like, "Hey, look, I'm going to ask you a lot of stupid questions because I'm brand new to this. I apologize in advance. I'm not. I
Sure.
just want to know your perspective. This like just doing a little bit of self-deprecation can be extremely
I think
helpful
that's right.
in bringing the comfort level up. Right. We're almost out of time, but I really wanted to hear any war stories you've had from due diligence land. So maybe we can wrap it up talking about some of those stories. It sounds like you have plenty. So let's talk
Oh
about
yeah.
some. What's some of your favorite?
So one was a company where the entrepreneur is actually a pretty well-known kind of marketing guru on LinkedIn and a serial entrepreneur. So he was kind of selling his third business because he wanted to go start the fourth, which is believable, right? But it was a slightly bigger deal, so like 2 million bucks, so enough where somebody like paid for quality of earnings, and we were walking through it. And this is one where it was a little bit outside of financial. So I'm looking at the management team because he was so excited with my client. Oh, I get a management team. They've already done this. All these guys are sticking around. And I look at it and I'm like, okay, but bro, these are like 15-year digital marketing executives and they're holding their salaries at 60K. That's not market.
Oh no.
So those four dudes that are like charging 60K on the P&L are probably worth three times that. So,
Easy.
4 times 120, that's almost $500,000 of SDE is going to go out of the window the second you buy it. They're like, yeah, I worked for that dude because I had equity. For you, I need the 180. And then just logically being an entrepreneur, I was like, hold on. So wait, this guy started three businesses, brought these guys along. They've grown up together. They know each other. He's going to go start a fourth and they're not going over there. Do you believe that, client? He's like, well, why? I mean, it says it in the. I'm like, yeah, but just like logically, like they're gonna go work for you for salary when they can go work for him and get equity. You really don't have a management team, and so the war story there is the deal didn't consummate because once you adjusted the SDE for the management team step up, what would be like a market rate salary, and once you accounted for the risk of them leaving, the business didn't really make sense to sell at that price. That's one. And then I'll tell you one that did close, but is a warning story. So one of my favorite clients, dude, lives in Belize, off the coast of Belize on an island. He bought his company
Mm.
and he went out there. It was an online service business. I'll be a little opaque here. Online service business. And they were leveraging sort of resources in the Philippines and other places to deliver a service here in the States. And so one of the big risks was that the seller could compete with the owner, with my client, the buyer. But the seller's like, no, I'm going to go start classes and I want to, I'm having kids now. I don't really want to do all that. I'm not going to compete. Don't worry about it. I just had this really small, like personal, coaching business. Don't even worry about it. And I was telling my client, I was like, yeah, that's great. But the moment that business doesn't pay her bills, she's going to go do what's made her money. I promise you. Well, no, man. No, look, she's not looking to do that, blah, blah, blah. And then, we still talk. So lo and behold, he's like, Elliott, I did the deal. I'm still making good money, but man, she's competing. I'm talking to lawyers to figure out if I want to take her to court. She's actually hurting me in some areas, but not enough for it to really be worth the court case. But it was like teeing them off. And I think the war story there is just, you guys got to think about like the human element here. Why wouldn't an owner compete? And there's a whole bunch of great reasons, but just ask it logically. And those are two. I actually have a whole war stories page on my website. So I'll give you that link as well. And I have like 10 long form war story blogs and a couple of videos. So there's some good meaty stuff in there too.
I love that. I have a friend, he sold a lot of marketing agencies, never with us because he's a horrible person.
Sure. Right.
He's actually a really close friend of mine, but he sold a lot of marketing agencies and he would just tell the buyer just like straight up, like, look, I'm not signing any non-compete for agencies. I've started so many over the years. I will probably eventually compete with you again. That's not my like intention, but it will
Sure.
probably eventually happen. You got to be okay with
Right.
that. Otherwise, I'm not going deeper into this deal. And he's just like upfront about it. And some buyers are actually like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I get it.
Sure.
And like, they're cool with it. But like,
Sure.
yeah, a buyer who doesn't like worry about the seller competing, like, not only do they know your entire business model, you also just gave them $2 million. Like,
That's
they
right.
can probably outcompete you very quickly.
Very quickly. Very
So,
quickly. And then those
Elliot,
employees are really theirs. The checks
yeah.
from the seller put those people's kids through school, pay for mortgages. So if it ever comes to, you know, when what comes to what, however you say that, they're going to have a very compelling reason to make life tough for you. So I would just say, just look out for yourself. Like I tell stories about messed up stuff because it's out there, but I'm also a deal dude and entrepreneur. So I still think buying companies is the best way to create wealth. So don't let anything I said today negate that general perspective.
Oh, I 100% agree. I like personally think that buying a business is the most legitimate way to get rich quick, in quotes, like
Yeah,
all the
that's right.
gurus saying you can do. Like, and I tell sellers like it's the same thing on the sell side. Like so many entrepreneurs, especially in my space, are fed on those courses. And then you realize like shit, this like online money isn't that great when Google makes an update. It's because like, well, yeah, because the course gurus don't know the real path to the wealth is when you sell the business, not when you keep running
That's
it.
it.
It's when you sell it.
That's
Now
right.
you go buy other businesses with that wealth and it just explodes. So, Elliot, this has been a blast, man. I didn't get through all my questions. I have a feeling that I
Sure.
should probably bring you back on at some point. So, but
I'd love
let's
to
end
come back.
this with what was been your funniest moment working in the due diligence world? Like anything you can
Ooh.
share, obviously.
Yeah, no, give me a second because I really want to dish something that's worthy of listening to. It was kind of funny, but it was kind of sad too. So, one of the things you have to watch out for is there are people in this industry that have great websites and great like online presence, but like can be real jerks in real life. And just because they smile on the internet doesn't mean they're reasonable. So I was doing a deal, and one of the like really prolific SBA lenders was the lender that my client was using. And we get on a phone call, and I'm looking at taxes, and the banker is like, "I rate." Greg, this dude is like yelling like a 6 year old having a meltdown because they didn't get ice cream at lunch. And this person's like, baby boomer generation. And I'm sitting here like I had to put the phone on mute and like text my client, like, is this grown man really yelling about like $100,000 difference on like $800,000. Like, is this really happening? Because like I can't respond. And then it ended up happening, Greg. Like he was yelling at my client. So I work for my client, and I'm more deal experienced than my client. So like I ended up having to kind of raise my voice just to stop the dude from yelling at my client. And like after the call, I'm sitting here like I see this person posting and educating folks. So there's a good side, and everybody's a mixed bag. But I'm like, I can never forget that dude yelling like a 6-year-old that didn't get their ice cream at lunch. Like it was wild.
I've encountered stuff like that. I had a seller come up to me once with this e-commerce business. Like, this is the next, I forget what the big brand was at the time. This has been like 2018. But he basically was saying, this is the next like $10 million company. And like, I shouldn't. And back then we had listing fees. Like, a seller had to pay us, like, I think it was like $200 for us to vet the
Sure,
business, which we refunded if we didn't accept the business. If we did accept the business,
sure,
then we'd take the $200 fee. It was just a
sure.
filter, right? And
Yeah,
I was like, okay, so you're telling me your business is so big you can't afford $200? Well, sounds like your business is in a lot of trouble. Like, we probably shouldn't list you at all. He's just like so taken aback. But
yeah.
some people, they have to be checked a little bit, and that's funny with the bank. I've been in many encounters like that where it just you think these guys like have it all together, and then suddenly the rage comes out. Like, what is this? But
Like,
Elliot,
whoa.
yeah, this has been an absolute pleasure, man. I'll probably have to bring you back on. I have a lot more questions on due diligence, but for people that want to connect with you and maybe partake in some of your services, where's the best place for them to hang out with you?
Sure. Go to Google and either type in my name, Elliott Holland, Elliott, or Guardian Due Diligence. If you get it even close in Google, you'll go to my website. I'm also the king of QOE on Twitter. That's my most active social. So come have some fun with me there. I also have a really great YouTube channel. My email and phone number are on my website, so I'm easy to catch that way. LinkedIn's bad, so I try my best, but don't start there.
I think I reached out to you on LinkedIn. So I'm a master of LinkedIn messaging because I'm probably the only one messaging on LinkedIn that isn't spam. It's like an actual real message written by me.
Yeah. So he's a marketing dude that knows how to leverage LinkedIn messages. If you don't know how to do it like Greg does, take your behind to my website. That's where you should find it.
They only have to pay me 2,997, and I'll teach you how to send just a normal message on LinkedIn.
I know
Or
you're
your
busy,
money
but
back.
delete. I really wanted to talk about delete. Like, state your case in 5 words, dude.
Dude,
You'll get attention.
I this is so off topic. I know we're about to end, but I actually got on the phone with the founder of Priceline through
Yeah.
LinkedIn because I listened to
Hmm.
it similar to what I did to you. I just like, hey, I really like this podcast, and so I got on like a 45-minute phone call with the Priceline founder, and we just bullshit about horror movies for 45 minutes. Like, this is great. Like, what do you mean no one has response back on LinkedIn? LinkedIn's great.
If you know how to use it, it's incredibly powerful. I've had several instances like that too. Just there's so much spam on there.
There
You got to be
is.
smart. How do you get through the spam?
For sure. Well, man, it was a pleasure. We'll put all those links in the show notes, and if the audience wants to come back, we'll bring you on back. I have a feeling we could have a very much deeper discussion on due diligence on the second round. So thanks again for coming on,
Awesome.
man.
Thanks for having me.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.